So we now understand the bounds of the neighborhood that we're responding to. And again, if you could keep that in mind as we have our discussion, as well as the fact that 911 emergency responders won't be available. You know, when we talk about an effective response to disaster, the time frame that we're the most interested in is the very first hour. We call that first hour the golden 60 minutes because of its value in helping us to save lives, reduce severity of injury, and decrease property damage. So as we think about a disaster occurring, I want you to keep in mind the bounds of the neighborhoods that we've talked about, and I also want you to keep in mind that the first hour, those golden 60 minutes, are critical in our disaster response. We're going to be talking today about the MYN program, which stands for Map Your Neighborhood. Whenever a disaster happens, what do you suppose happens to rational thought?
Out the window.
Goes right out the window. It's a true thing. You know, we've done an awful lot of research and have identified that people don't panic. That's one of those disaster myths that we like to dispel. We're not so concerned about a panic response from you as we are concerned that you won't be able to think your best. When disaster occurs, it's very helpful to have an actual guideline that will help us to know exactly what to do to save lives, reduce significant injury, and save our property. So those are the things that we're going to learn first. If you can open your handout, we're going to be learning this sequence that will help us when we're not able to think our best. When the Nisqually earthquake occurred on February 28, 2001, we had at that time many neighborhoods that were organized and prepared for disaster. And one of my excellent block coordinators lived on the Capitol Hill area in Seattle in a two-story colonial-style home. On the south side of their home, they had two-story brick chimneys. Now we remember whenever there's a significant event like an earthquake, the ground begins to move and shift underneath our feet. There are two rather dramatic ground motions we need to expect. One is the ground actually begins to undulate. Many people report feeling seasick during the movement of an earthquake. The other thing that happens is the ground begins to rapidly spring forward. The best way to conceptualize that rapid ground movement comes from looking at lessons learned in the Northridge earthquake in 1994 in Southern California. As damage assessors were going around neighborhoods, they found some evidence of stereos, televisions, and computers that had left their countertop as the ground began to accelerate, left their countertop, flew across the room, and struck the opposite wall at same height. Now you think about the force that would be required to hit your house that will send your television set across the room, striking the opposite wall, and it gives you a really good idea of ground acceleration. So when an earthquake occurs, we have ground undulation, we have rapid ground acceleration. And here are Dave and Sue on Capitol Hill in a two-story colonial home with two-story brick chimneys. What do you suppose happened in the ground movement to those brick chimneys?
Collapse.
They come down. In fact, collapsing chimneys are one of the most prevalent forms of structural damage that we see following a significant earthquake. Now, as those two chimneys collapsed, they pulled the greater part of the south wall right off their home. They were both recently retired. Dave was upstairs in the den, Sue was downstairs in the kitchen. They fortunately had trained themselves to do the safe and correct thing when an earthquake occurs. Because when that kind of activity is occurring, where does rational thought go? It goes out the window. We know that we don't panic, but we don't think our best. When rational thought has fled, what's left behind? Training. Our training, the things that we have trained ourselves to do, and instinct. What do you suppose instinct tells you to do in a big earthquake? It tells you to run. We call that instinct what?
Flight.
Fight, flight. Exactly right, which says we're going to get away from the thing that is going wrong. It's the very last thing you want to do in an earthquake because things like south sides of the wall can fall down on top of us. As we've trained ourselves to do the correct thing, then even in the face of a very strong instinctual drive to run, we will do the correct thing. They had trained themselves. Dave upstairs in the den, what do you suppose he did? Got down under the desk, drop, cover, hold, we understand that. Sue in the kitchen didn't have a table to get under, so she knelt down beside the cabinetry, which gave her protection from things that might be falling out. They rode out that earthquake, lasted about 2 minutes, came together in the kitchen, and I will never forget the emotion which they shared with me as they looked at one another, so grateful to see that they were okay. Imagine the noise of the failure. Imagine the sight. Imagine the smell. And you can see why they were so relieved. They looked at one another and they said, "Oh my gosh, what do we do now?" And then they said, almost in unison, "The 9 steps!" And they went and they grabbed the 9 steps and they knew exactly what to do. Now our time frame for an effective disaster response is what? It's the first hour, those golden 60 minutes. And this sequence is designed to help you, first at home and then in the neighborhood, know exactly what to do to make sure that yourself, your loved ones, your property, and then the neighborhood is in fact okay. Let's learn those 9 steps now.
The first step immediately following a disaster is take care of your loved ones. Your initial response activities will be in your own home. While personal preparedness is essential, neighborhood preparedness is the focus of this video. For personal preparedness resources, please see the information provided with the DVD.
Now we have learned that the more you are prepared at home, the less you are going to be impacted. I do not know of a stronger statement I can make for the value of personal preparedness than that. If you put yourself in the shoes of Dave and Sue, when that earthquake occurs, the time to prepare ends. And now we are going to respond and then recover. The more that we're ready before, the less we're going to have to worry about things going wrong, turning upside down, people being hurt, significantly injured. So we're going to start right there.
Step number 2 is protect your head, feet, and hands. Just like a firefighter would never show up at a fire without protective clothing, you should always protect yourself against injury by dressing for safety.
If you become injured because you haven't taken a second to get yourself appropriately clothed, now we've got more victims instead of great responders. So we want you to dress appropriately.
Protect your feet against injury by wearing sturdy shoes.
Boots are fine, but you don't need to run out and get a pair of boots if you don't have one. We're talking about a pair of sturdy shoes that will give you protection against what, primarily, do you think? Glass, exactly right. In fact, broken glass is one of the most common things that we see happen inside our homes. In fact, when we look at past earthquakes, the most common injury that we see typically is cut feet. Exactly right. How do we prevent cut feet? Shoes. Sturdy shoes. Where do we recommend you keep a pair of sturdy shoes all the time? Under the bed. Everybody have a pair of sturdy shoes beside the bed as we speak? Yes. For those of you who don't, take care of that today. Soon as you get home, make sure that there is a pair of sturdy shoes beside each bed. It is silly for you and your family to be at risk for the most common injury when it could not be more easily prevented. Now, when you think about the shoes that you want beside the bed, think about stepping on glass. So that's your measuring stick. What are the kinds of shoes you want or your children want to have on their feet should you encounter broken glass at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Protect your hands against cuts from broken glass and other debris by wearing leather gloves.
Where do you suppose we're going to recommend you keep the leather gloves? Under the bed. Under the bed, exactly right, because then you know exactly where they are.
Protect your head from falling debris with a hard hat or bicycle helmet.
If it's a bike helmet you use routinely, we would rather that you have a hard hat because then day or night you know exactly where these are. Now, hard hats are available at the hardware store. They come now in a variety of designer colors. You can get them to match whatever it is you would like them to match, but we want you to keep them under the bed. When you first purchase them, don't think of this as a hard hat, because that, you know, who wants to go buy a hard hat? Think of this as a gift basket. For mom, for dad, for grandma, for grandpa, for the kids, think of it as a gift basket. Mother's Day, put some chocolate, put some flowers, put a bow on it, give your mom a kiss, tell her when the chocolate is gone, I want you to put this where? Under the bed. Under the bed. Why? Because I love you, and I want you to be safe during a disaster response. Dad, put a ratchet set in there. Kids, put some Legos in there. But let's get hard hats under the bed. And whenever the gift basket is done being a basket, it goes under the bed. So day or night, we know exactly where it is.
Step number 3 is check the natural gas or propane at your home. This is one of the best ways to prevent residential fire, a common problem after disasters like earthquakes. Remember, 911 emergency responders, especially firefighters, will not immediately be available to everyone who will need them.
You know, of all of our 911 emergency responders, police, fire, medical, utility folks, you can write in stone the fire department is not going to be available to you. It's not because they don't want to. They want to help everyone. What prevents them from doing that? Clogged roads, and who needs them? Everyone. So there just is not enough of those folks to go around, which is why what we're doing today is so very important. And the fire department's first job on their response checklist is to conduct a damage assessment. Before they can even start fighting the fires, they need first of all to see who really needs them. Their mandate is greatest good for greatest number. They can't accomplish that until they have conducted a damage assessment. So the first thing they're going to do is what? They're going to drive the streets conducting a windshield survey to see where the greatest need exists. I talked to firefighters after the Northridge earthquake, and one of them said with a catch in his voice, hardest thing I ever had to do in my life is drive by fire, because we're the heroes. We don't do that. But in a disaster, they do. They'll make a note of your home, but they'll keep right on going if they're in the middle of their damage assessment. So when it comes to something like fire, we have got to be ready and prepared to be very aggressive. And one of the best things that we can do is simply remove the common fuel source. So step number 3 says shut off natural gas and propane as necessary.
There are only 3 reasons why you should shut off the gas. First, if you smell it, a smell like rotten eggs or sulfur. Second, you hear it hissing as it escapes broken pipes. Or third, the dials on the panel are spinning much more rapidly than normal.
If you come outside following an earthquake and you see abnormal movement on those dials, there could be a leak that is occurring that you wouldn't be able to smell or hear. In order for you to know that the dials are moving more rapidly than normal, what do you need to know? You got to know normal. So sometime in the next couple of days, go and get acquainted with your gas meter. You're going to need to know where it is and then take a look at those dials, especially at some time when the furnace is running, when the stove is on, when you've got quite a consumption of gas. Go and take a look at the dials. Then in an event, if you see abnormal movement, you will want to shut that gas off.
To shut off natural gas, turn the valve 1/4 turn or 90 degrees in either direction so that the valve crosses the pipe. Keep a crescent wrench next to the meter for quick and easy action.
Now it's important to remember that this is a valve and not a screw, so we do not care about direction. Either way will work. We simply want to take the valve, the principle being that we have now crossed the pipe with it that stops the flow of gas right here before it can flow through the meter and into the house.
To shut off propane gas, find the valve located under the safety cap. Turn the shutoff valve to the right until it closes completely.
Propane is like a faucet, and so in order to shut the propane off, that in that instance is righty-tighty to get it shut off.
Step number 4 is shut off water at the house main. If water pipes have broken, gravity may drain water out of your water heater and toilet tanks. Cracked pipes also may allow contaminants into the water supply.
Remember, when an earthquake occurs, we've got this ground movement. We've got undulation, we've got rapid ground acceleration, we've got a solid water pipe in the ground, and in the face of that kind of ground movement, what can happen? It can break or it can crack. by shutting the water off at the house, what we're achieving is making sure that the water that is in the house doesn't go anywhere. We're particularly interested in the water in the hot water heater. For most of us, that's 40 or 50 gallons of water that reside in the house all the time. If we were to have a big earthquake, we're talking potentially about an extended recovery period. You're going to want to have available that water as a resource to you. Additionally, maybe the break in the line occurs 1.5 miles down the road. What could happen at that 1.5 mile spot? Contaminants, pollutants can enter the water supply, and those could come into your home and contaminate that pure source of water. So we shut the water off, again, where? At the house, to keep the water and to make sure that it does not become contaminated.
To shut off the water, find the master shutoff valve. Possible locations include the garage, basement, or near the water heater. Turn the valve to the right until the water is completely shut off. It's a good idea to label this valve and make sure everyone in the house knows where it is located. Please note that this is not the valve located in a cement box near the street. That valve requires a special tool and is very difficult to shut off.
Make sure that everybody in your house knows where the master shutoff valve is and get that labeled. I was raised with 6 brothers and sisters, and we're all relatively close together, and one evening at back to school night, my folks were both at the school, and our hot water heater sprang a leak. And we didn't know how to shut the water off at that time. Now, we wound up using all of the towels that we could find first, and then all the blankets, and then all the pillows, and finally the sofa cushions as we tried to stem the flood. Mom and Dad came home, they saw this fortress built around the hot water heater and the water still flowing and going everywhere. My dad immediately took us kids and showed us where the water shutoff valve was. Now, unfortunately, that was about 3 hours too late for that particular event. So make sure in your house that everybody knows where that is. Get it labeled and make sure that you can get that to turn.
Step number 5 is post OK help cards. Following a disaster, you may need help, or you will want to help your neighbors who are in distress. Look at the OK help card on the back cover of your handout. Keep 2 Band-Aids with the card and use them to hang the card on the front door or a window so it is visible from the street. This will help everyone in the neighborhood locate those who need help immediately.
In our neighborhood, we have 20 homes. When we have a significant disaster, we want to make sure that you are prepared to take full advantage of those golden 60 minutes. If you had to check on every one of the 20 homes, you're going to get that done in an hour? Probably not. That's the power of these cards, signaling your status to your neighbors. We know statistically, historically, most of us are going to be just fine. As we place the OK sign up in the window or on the door so that it's visible, we will be able, during the disaster response from the street, to say, they're okay, they're okay, they're okay. Oh, we've got potentially a trouble here, and we're going to be able to focus on people who are in need first. Now, we recommend that you use, what is your adhesive? Who's discovered that? Band-Aid. Couple of Band-Aids, exactly right. So as soon as you get home, what we want you to do is put a couple of Band-Aids inside this workbook and place this, where do you suppose? Under the bed, along with sturdy shoes, leather gloves, hard hat. Now we've got everything that we need in order to be very effective in the first moments of a disaster response. When you look at the back, it helps you to remember the sequence or the priority that we want you to follow. And you'll see that it says, first of all, we are going to check on all the homes that have either help or no card displayed. What do you suppose would be a reason why people would not have a card up? They're not home. That could be the case. Or they have been injured in the earthquake. You know, as we look at disasters that occur around our country, there are 4 basic injuries that we typically see people experience. Those 4 are broken bones, sprains, cuts, and burns. Even in earthquake country, it's very unusual for us to see actual structural collapse. So we're not so concerned about crush injuries, really horrific things occurring. Instead, broken bones, sprains, cuts, and burns. In and of themselves, probably not life-threatening. But what could any one of these 4 injuries lead to? Shock. Exactly right. Shock. What's the problem with shock? You can die. You can die from shock. That's exactly right. I could have a sprained ankle, go into shock, and now my life is at risk. Now in the earthquake, remember we've got this dramatic ground movement, so you think that it's not uncommon at all for people to experience a sprained ankle if they were up on their feet and got knocked off. It's the possibility that I could go into shock that makes these cards absolutely invaluable. We talked about the criticality of the golden hour. We've talked about the threat of fire, and we've already identified that one thing that we can do to help reduce threat of fire is to shut off our natural gas. The second most important thing that we need to be prepared for is to outreach immediately to our neighbors, especially those who are in distress. Shock could cause someone in a disaster to lose their life. So we want to be very aggressive in going out and checking.
Step number 6 is put your fire extinguisher on the sidewalk or street edge. Fire can be a major problem during times of disaster because the fire department may not be immediately available. If one home catches fire, other homes in the neighborhood may be at risk. So be aggressive about putting out fires while they are small. Placing fire extinguishers outside on the sidewalk or street edge following a disaster makes this resource available to the neighborhood.
2 things to remember when you're placing your fire extinguisher outside. Number 1, we want these, when they're placed outside, to be in line of sight. If you have sidewalks, we want them to go right on the sidewalk.